Chairman, we're now live.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Corporate Finance and Property Select Committee. A warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, which is Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Mills and I'm Chairman of this evening's meeting. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which people in the room have and are accessible online under the live broadcast. For those of you present in the room and intending to speak, please know that you'll be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone that's speaking, your voice will only be audible if the microphone is switched on. Also, under the current guidelines, please can you wear a mask at all times unless you are called, and when you are speaking, then please remember to remove it as well as turning your microphone on. Once you finish speaking, please put your mask back on. In terms of a fire alarm, we're not expecting a drill, so if the alarm does go off, please follow officers to the exits. Before we move on to the formal agenda, I'd like to introduce councillors and officers present. So starting on my right, Councillor Vanessa Harangi, Councillor Fahad Chubadar, Councillor Richard Lewis and Councillor Steve Tuckwell, and on my left, Councillor Tony Edgington and Councillor Lindsay Bliss. Also joined by a number of officers this evening. They are as follows: Naveed Mohammed, Head of Business Performance and Insight; Ian Waters, Head of Finance, Financial Planning, Capital, Treasury and Systems; Sarah Hollingworth, Transformation Lead; and Democratic Services Officer Liz Penny. Thanks very much. That brings us on to the agenda of the meeting. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Ray Graham, with Councillor Steve Tuckwell substituting. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest in matters coming before us this evening? No, I don't see anything. Thank you. Agenda item 3, to receive the minutes of our previous meeting, which is 24th of November 2021. Does anyone have any comments on those? I don't see anything, so I'm happy to take those as agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is to confirm that all items of business before us this evening are part 1 and can therefore be held in public. There are no part 2 items. Agenda item 5 is the review of the final report that has been put together as part of our major review in terms of performance monitoring and reporting in Hillingdon. Hopefully at the last meeting, members will remember that we agreed the recommendations from this review. They were tweaked slightly based on discussions that we had that evening. They have now all been recirculated and form part of the overall report that has been circulated to members, which I hope people have taken the opportunity to read. I don't intend to go through this in detail unless anyone has any questions or challenges to the content of the report. Are we happy to agree? Councillor Edgington.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there were a couple of things which I thought perhaps just to make this a bit more direct. On the recommendation 1B, on the third line of that, it talks about select committees may be presented with regular high-level quarterly performance tables, updates. There's no point in actually putting regular in there, because if it's quarterly, it will be regular. So it probably would be better just to remove regular from that. I wondered also whether it might be worthwhile for the third 1C to have that as cabinet members and select committee have input into the metrics which are presented to the CMT. I really think that it would be worthwhile there being some sort of advice from scrutiny on that.
I think on that, I'd be so first one regularly. Yep, take that. In terms of the second one, I'd be minded to leave it as the cabinet members because they're the ones that ultimately have responsibility. I think select committees can then feed into those cabinet members through the work that select committees do. I think that's the role of that. So rather than us being involved in the metrics, I think that's too granular for the responsibility of the select committees. For me, that sits at the decision-making cabinet. Councillor Lewis?
Can I suggest actually the word regular remains in the text, in as much as you could have intermittent, you could be every 6 months you have a quarterly report. It doesn't mean to say you actually have to have it at every meeting. Therefore, I actually think it's a pertinent word to the sentence.
Could I suggest then we remove the regular, put in quarterly at that point, so it actually shows that it is quarterly. So move the quarterly before high level. So it reads with quarterly high level performance updates, rather than regular means nothing. Regular can be every year, can't it? Strictly. Just going to be the same interval.
Yeah. Okay. So you don't have the word quarterly in twice.
No. Remove the second quarterly.
No, you need it in twice.
Put quarterly in at the before.
No, but it is quarterly performance figures. They are quarterly performances. Otherwise, you could have monthly performance figures every quarter.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's two parts here. There is the first is how often do they come,
Exactly.
which we were saying regularly, which is up for challenge. The second part is what are they showing the performance of, and we're saying they're showing the performance of a quarter, which I think we're saying is okay. How often do they come? Regular can be anything, whether it's to them being delivered every quarter, depending on the cycle of information. I think we can revisit. I think the challenge is with the word regular, right?
Often.
Select committees can also be presented with high-level quarterly performance updates. Do we need anything before that, or are we happy if we just remove the word regular?
Okay. I'm not going to die on it.
Okay.
Could I also, Chair?
Yes.
It looks to me as though in the first recommendation there are effectively two. This is one under 1A. There seem to be two things. One is to review the current use of data within the various services, and the second is to consider review the amount, and then also I did see that I thought there were two areas there. Let me just see what I was going to say. One seems to be saying review of the current use, and the second is the regular reporting to Cabinet. So there are two things which I thought which perhaps there were two recommendations there rather than just the one.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because I think where these we're not saying there are three recommendations. There's three sections of recommendations. So within 1.A, that is the recommendations that impact Cabinet. There's effectively two within that. So we could, if we really wanted to be granular, we could say 1A I, 1A II.
Okay.
Roman numerals for 1 and 2. Sorry, to split it out again. In terms of how we lay it out, happy for those minor changes to be made.
And the other point on the performance reporting, I wonder whether we ought to also include something for residents as well. So there'd be regular information either on the website or for residents in Hillingdon people. Because at the moment there's no real information which is supplied as to how the council is performing for residents to see, except obviously budget monitoring there is, but nothing else.
Naveed?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, if the data is going to be coming to the select committee, then that will be publicly available, because it will be sort of obviously all minutes will be shared online. So that should address that point.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that. I think if it comes to a select committee, it comes in agendas and meeting packs which are publicly available. I think to look to build in something specific around publishing information for residents, that's not something that came up during the session, so to try and build that in now, I think it's probably a bit after the event in terms of what we've already put.
And on number 2, the performance culture, I wonder whether instead of putting, because this is clearly the importance of ensuring that the quality of the data being input is, that importance is circulated throughout the council. And I wonder whether instead of considering the use of managing briefings toolkits, etc., we changed it to including.
Yeah.
So because considering is, you can consider it and dismiss it.
Yeah, happy for that change.
And then finally, sorry, I've dragged this out, on performance innovation, I wonder whether it would be better for the business performance team to be involved in choosing what software they need rather than corporate procurement. So although corporate procurement will obviously be involved later on, I doubt whether corporate procurement has actually got the expertise to choose. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I think that's why we've got in conjunction with the business performance team, because I think any procurement exercise has got to be led by procurement, otherwise there's no point having them if the department's going to go out and do it themselves. But I would imagine, and again, we can clarify, but I think for a procurement exercise to take place, the business performance team will need to engage with the procurement team. So it's going to be a collaborative exercise from the outset, rather than Naveed send an email and procurement just go and do it and then come back to him and say, these are your options. I'd imagine it's much more collaborative than that.
So we'd have to put a business case together and work in conjunction with IT colleagues, corporate procurement colleagues, etc. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Tudor, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. No, after Naveed's comment covers what I was going to say. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on this? Okay, thank you. And again, just a final thank you to everyone and to all the witnesses that came to that. I think this was a good review, input from all sides, all parties, all individuals, and grateful for the outputs that we've generated. Thank you to Liz, obviously, for putting the report together. In terms of a cabinet date, it is targeted for March cabinet, is my understanding. Again, members will receive the cabinet agenda and papers, so do keep an eye out for that when that date comes along for that item being presented to cabinet. Thank you. Agenda item 6, Naveed, thank you very much. Agenda item 6 is the 2023 budget proposals for services within the remit of this committee. Ian, thank you for joining us. I know you're a regular at the select committees across the organisation. Thank you for the paper that's been prepared for members with all the data involved in it and nice narrative around it. Grateful if you can take us through this, and then I expect members will have some questions, then we'll look to agree some collaborative comments around it.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is my second appearance at this committee this year. So back in the summer, we ran through the framework and the context in which the budget was being set. The budget setting process has now progressed as is expected, and on the 16th of December, Cabinet agreed to their consultation budget for the 22-23 financial year. And that is now out to public consultation, and through this month's select committees, there's the opportunity for select committees to feed into that process as well. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to go through the report verbatim or anything, but I just wanted to highlight the strategic narrative in terms of the budget that's being set and the context of that 5-year budget that it sits within, and then just very briefly comment on the detail on the committee, and then probably pass back to the committee for questions if that's okay. So in terms of that strategic view of the budget, so based on the outputs from the Chancellor's Spending Review 2021 back in October, we've got those funding levels kind of factored into the budget. We're modelling in the medium term on 1% per annum social care precept, which has now been confirmed as part of the government's sort of array of funding mechanisms for social care, and a 1.8% per annum increase in council tax. Those uplifts together mean that if by 26-27, so that's year 5, the back end of the medium-term financial forecast, we'll have £32 million of additional funds to invest in services in the borough. However, over that same period, we've got growing demand for services, including the legacy of COVID-19, inflationary pressures, and the need to support capital investment over the period, all of which together add £66 million to the running cost of the council. So what that means is effectively this budget's being produced in the context of a gap of £34 million to bridge over a 5-year period. Now, in the context of a budget that's running up in the region of £240 million at the minute, it's a large number, but not an insurmountable number. Work to date has identified around £30 million worth of savings over that period, with a small gap of £5 million to be identified sort of in later MTFF cycles. And importantly, the savings have been developed to effectively balance the budget for 22-23 in full, with no reliance on balances, or general balances, to bridge that gap. The impact of COVID-19 on the budget obviously is one of the largest features. If we look back to 2020-21, we spent £32 million above our budgets on managing the pandemic. In the current financial year, that figure looks to be around 19 million, and for both those years we've been able to fund that from external government support. However, there's an array of ways that the pandemic could continue to impact on services, and of that savings requirement that we've got, around 7 million is effectively the direct fallout of the pandemic, whereby we've seen things like increases in costs in areas such as social care. However, that's fully taken account of in the numbers before that I mentioned. General balances are set to stay within the recommended range, so 26 million are uncommitted balances, and we're not expecting to draw those down to deliver the budget strategy as it stands at the moment. And overall, this budget has £383 million worth of planned capital investment over the MTFF period. So this includes some sort of major items, including significant investment in high needs school places, sums of money being included for the sort of redevelopment of the Civic Centre site, and £25 million worth of funding for the sort of carbon reduction agenda, sort of supporting that net zero ambition for the authority. Of that investment, about 122 million will be funded through borrowing, and that will mean that our sort of peak debt, our highest level of borrowing, will be around 311 million pounds in the MTFF period, and effective funding to repay that and service it in full has been factored into budget plans going forward, so that's all fully funded into the budget as presented. Focusing on the services within the remit of the committee, and this is where table 2 of the report provides a sort of neat little summary by cabinet portfolio. We've looking at the change from 21-22, the current year, into 22-23. There's quite a significant inflationary increase. Obviously, that reflects, I suppose, what everyone will be seeing in their own experience, that inflation is here and it's quite real. In particular, within the committee's remit, the centralised energy and fuel budgets for the council sit within this committee's remit, so that's why we see quite substantial inflationary increases for those two areas. With energy budgets year on year being increased by 35% and fuel budgets going up by 14%. Alongside that, we've got the more regular sort of workforce and contract inflation that you'd expect to see. In terms of savings, we've got £1.9 million worth of savings included, and we've expanded on them in the report, so I won't sort of read them all out just now, but I think it's fair to say within this portfolio they're very much focused on service transformation and really delivering efficiencies in back office processes. I suppose at that point, I'd pass back to you, Chair, and ask if there's any questions on the paper.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ian. Happy to take any questions from members to Ian. Councillor Bliss.
I hate taking these masks off and on. A couple of things. I was a little bit confused by this table, how you worked out the inflation for each item. It doesn't seem to be the same percentages all the way down. And the other thing is the fuel inflation seems quite low considering the vast increase in the cost of fuel.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the inflation, so cabinet portfolio by cabinet portfolio, we're applying different levels of inflation to different sort of subjectives or different areas of spend. So on the energy lines, which sit exclusively within the finance portfolio, those are in at 35%, so that will be driving as a percentage for that portfolio. They'll have a higher level of inflation than say corporate services transformation, which is much more focused on the workforce spend, which has got a lower percentage in there. Similarly, the other factor that will be driving up the finance number, the procurement number will be higher as well as fuel, as the corporate fleet sits within the procurement service for management purposes. In terms of the 14% that we've got included for fuel inflation, I suppose that's I suppose maybe it's important to bear in mind it's the movement from the budget we've established for the previous year rather than necessarily what we were spending in, say, September, October time. So we had included an inflationary uplift, I believe, in the region of sort of 7-8% last year, which in effect hasn't really been required in the early part of the year, and in the later part of the year we've caught up that 7-8%, and we're building another 14 on top.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Ian, for the report. It does seem to me that it's much shorter than previous years. There's a lot more information, a lot less information provided on the strategy, on the calculation of the changes and the details of the proposed savings. Previously there was a full list of that, I think, earlier years, and there seems to be nothing like that now. And similarly, when it comes to the capital projects, some of the very large ones, there seems to be a severe lack of detail. Anyway, that's the general point. I see that the figure for inflation in respect of workforce expenditure is planned at between 2 and 1.5% after next year. And that seems incredibly low, bearing in mind the level of inflation now and the expected level of 2% in the future, knowing that there's almost certainly going to be caps, no changes to income tax and national insurance rates unless they go up in that time. So I wonder whether that is realistic. When it comes to some of the savings, for example, on the savings which I mentioned on page 34, the top paragraph on finance, we talk about a £200,000 saving, efficiency saving in exchequer and business assurance. Now, I gather that probably is internal audit and corporate fraud team mainly, and both, certainly the corporate fraud team, if there was a reduction in the numbers there, there's a risk that the amount which they're recovering for the investigations which they make may well go down. So that's a bit worrying in my view, unless there's something which I've missed there. There's shown as £100,000 saving from the measures to minimise damage to the council vehicle fleet. Now, I realise that probably can be achieved, but I doubt whether it can be achieved at no cost. So I'm wondering whether that I'm not quite sure how that's going to be achieved without some cost, either in extra training or outside help of some sort. So those are my initial thoughts anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillors. So I suppose in terms of the specific queries then, and shout if I skip over any in running back through. So on future workforce inflation, so what we're looking at there, the budget is based around the Bank of England projections, where the base rate for inflation is expected to track back to 2%. Obviously, there's a case that may potentially be optimistic, and we might see sort of higher inflation for longer. But sort of, as and when that's emerging, we would factor that into the NTFF. And on workforce inflation, we've based this on, if you look back over the past decade, we've had the nationally negotiated pay increase for local government has been lower than that 2% Bank of England's target rate. So effectively that's where our sort of 1.5–2% is coming from, is coming in that range of being pitched below that Bank of England target rate to reflect the historic outcome of the negotiations. Obviously, as we approach each financial year, we'll keep that under review, and this is only the budgeting assumption. Obviously, those negotiations will continue as they continue, and we will we'll make sure we reflect any emerging intelligence on them. On the savings front, there are £200,000 worth of efficiencies from exchequer and business assurance services. So they're mainly coming from the sort of the exchequer area of the service. So this is it includes the transactional finance teams that deal with accounts payable and receivable, and the sort of revenues and benefits services. And a lot of those efficiency savings are are expected to emerge from planned service review following on from some of the sort of robotics and automation work that's going on in the council, to which I'll point to my colleague there. And really what we're looking at there is where we've got some of the very transactional processes, like when you're updating change of circumstance and things, where at the minute somebody fills in a form, they send it in, we need an officer to input that, and then we get to the point of assessing the benefits, say, that first step can be run automatically, and it means we can focus staffing resource on assessing the claims, not processing them.
But that seems to be separate. That seems to be the streamlining of transactional financial processes, which is a further 150,000. So isn't that separate?
No, so that is the streamlining of transactional financial processes it's a similar approach in terms of the sort of robotics automation, but that's looking at our sort of things like our purchase to pay systems. So it's about how in the we've brought together a lot of the staff involved in effectively commissioning spend into the Exchequer and Business Assurance Services, and there's a lot of work looking at the business processes to make sure that they're as lean as possible and that we're cutting down on, say, duplication of effort in those. But the savings within sort of revenues and benefits are focused on within the 200k, and the 150k is the ones within the transactional finance services.
I think the final point was just on the vehicle fleet.
Oh yes,
right.
So there are as part of to deliver the 100k saving, there are sort of measures including training. There are already sort of training budgets within the fleet service, so it's about refocusing those and applying them in different ways. There are some other measures in there, so there is some of the some of the planned investment in capital for fleet includes trackers in vehicles, so that's about gaining that performance data on what the service is doing and enabling management to use that knowledge about what's going on with individual vehicles, the individual drivers, to help direct that training maybe better than a catch-all training offer that we may have had previously.
A couple more questions, if I may. On technical administration, there seems to be a very large efficiency saving expected of £500,000 on the review of technical administration. What's the total cost of technical administration in that we can save £500,000?
Sorry, if it's okay, I'll go away and confirm for the minutes, but I want to say it's in the region of 5 million. So it's an ambitious saving, but I think it's about bringing together, similar to the transactional finance processes, it's about bringing together functions that maybe were managed in a disparate way across the organisation.
And similarly with the, if I may, Chair, savings of £415,000 in respect of the customer contact. Again, what's the total cost there, and what's the saving going to hope to be?
I'll confirm the total budget, so I'm picking up the correct figure. But again, this is about looking at effectively sort of customer contact. And actually, this is the one that probably does lead nicely into the next item on the agenda, in terms of that. Historically, our model's been very much based around almost not quite every query, but whatever your query, you phone up and you wait and you talk to somebody, and then you find out what it is you want to find out from the council. And actually, we can by sorting out the access channels, if that's the way to put it, we can make sure that people are getting that answer without having to phone in, and that means that effectively there may be fewer bums on seats, but it means that people are phoning through and getting through to answer those maybe more difficult questions, more challenging questions, where they do need an individual rather than maybe to check the day the bin collection's coming or something.
Councillor Bliss.
Yeah, I just wonder if you could give a bit more information on the 300k savings that are expected from democratic services. Is this to do with the cutting number of councillors?
It is, yes. So this is with the following the upcoming election. Obviously, there'll be fewer councillors. So there's a direct saving in terms of sort of a lower level of allowances, and there's also an expectation that this will lead into effectively a service review around democratic services support, because if you've got a smaller council, then it implies that the back office support to support that will be smaller.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you.
Yes, there's also quite significant savings in, I see business support. I mean, it somewhat confuses matters in that we've got some of the commentary relates to future years as well, so I've tried to ignore that. Moving on to the capital matters, capital expenditure, I see there's £35 million for civic centre work. Can you explain, please? Because that's quite a significant amount. It's £350 for every Band D property in the borough. Can you explain how that is? I believe it talks about something about housing provision, but clearly this building is listed, so there's going to be a limited scope, I would imagine, in being able to do much with this building, even though it may not be ideal for modern businesses nowadays. But if you could explain that, that would be really helpful. Thanks, Ian.
Cool. Yes. So within in the capital programmes, we've got this budget for £35 million for the reconfiguration of the civic centre site and effectively a modernisation of the council's accommodation. So the key financing strategy on this is that there's an expectation that we can make better use of the land on the site, if that's the way to put it, and that should be able to generate income that will offset most of those costs. So I believe it's around 25 million of that £35 million we're assuming can be generated through effectively better use of the site. So identifying areas, as you say, the main building is here. It's got listed status on parts of it, but there is surplus. There is other land on the site which can be used for other purposes, which will enable funding to be released to support the project. In terms of the nature of the work, so the kind of scoping feasibility activity is ongoing at the moment. The 35 million is very much an indicative early figure, so it's not yet a firm worked up plan. But one of the key things that's going to come out of the reconfiguration of the site is this will contribute towards delivering something closer to a carbon neutral civic centre. So this is one of the largest carbon emitting. Well, it's our single largest carbon emitting asset. And this project will not only make sure we've got sort of an appropriate modern accommodation that we can sort of meet residents' requirements from, it also means we can do that with a lower carbon footprint as well.
Thank you. But there is also a separate £25 million for carbon reduction activities as well. So that's not this building, or not this site, that 25 million, that's somewhere else. And presumably it's not for housing, because that will go through the housing revenue account, presumably. So it's just other council properties, commercial properties.
Other sort of corporate general fund properties. So the £25 million that's been included is really, so alongside the specific works on the civic centre site, the £25 million is really I suppose a marker in the sand in terms of setting the council's own resources aside to support that wider net zero ambition. I can't recall the figures, but I think if you look at the emissions, I believe the civic centre is less than 25% of the council's emissions as a whole. We've got a significant estate, including things like the vehicle fleet, all of which are contributing to the carbon footprint. So the £25 million is in many senses maybe an initial figure in terms of funding being put in. It's expected that we'll be able to leverage in some kind of extra government support as well towards that. Obviously, we'll see how that develops in terms of future spending reviews, future budgets. But if the country as well as the council is committed to a net zero ambition, so we'd be looking to secure extra funding for that as we go forward.
The water sports facility, I see that is still planned. Worries me that we've had the offer of the money, haven't we, from HS2 Limited for 3 or 4 years in order to progress the replacement of HOAC, Hillingdon Outdoor Activities Centre, and nothing seems to have happened yet on that. I don't know whether the figures which we've included here are realistic in terms of timescale?
So the budget's based on effectively those sort of the latest plans coming out of sort of service departments in terms of spending commitments. The budget for that project line continues to be funded effectively by the HS2 funding that's been awarded. So as far as I suppose in addressing, I'm comfortable. This is our current best estimate of phasing of capital expenditure.
But presumably, because we've left it so long, the costs will have gone up quite significantly, I would have guessed. I don't know whether the offer which has been made by HS2 is also inflation linked, but I don't know whether you can tell us that.
So the funding from HS2 is for a fixed cash sum. The budget is our sort of latest and best estimates. That's the way to put it.
Councillor Bliss.
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. On page 39, the Botwell Leisure Centre football pitch seems to have lost its budget. It had, on page 37 it's down as 200, but on page 39 it's 0.
I believe that's an error in the way we've printed this. So it does, I can confirm it does have a 200k budget. It should have a 200k budget in both schedules. And I'll double check the main cabinet papers that we've not carried that in both papers.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is the motor vehicle workshop. Is that a replacement for the workshop that was in West Drayton by the youth centre?
It is, yeah. Yes. So it's the relocation of the workshop to as part of the sort of the asset reconfiguration around the new leisure centre project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ian, thank you very much. Thank you to members for the questions. And you can, yes.
Yes, there's reference to Woodside Development. Now, I don't know what that is, and it's not referred to, I don't think, or at least I couldn't see it, which is 2.575 million. In 23-24. Can you let me know what that is, please, Ian?
So this is a planned housing development on HRA land that also includes an element of community space that would be otherwise available. So the community element is part of the general fund budget and sits on this side, and then the residential side sits in the HRA.
Thank you for those questions, and a number of things I was going to cover have already been covered off. So thank you for going through those. I think what we want to do is, as a committee, I'm keen for us to agree comments. I know there's been a number of questions, and I think those have hopefully, to the most part, been satisfactorily answered. Obviously, the comments that we make are focusing on the remit of this committee. So I've put something together that I'm proposing to share with the committee in the hope of getting agreement, but obviously keen to get members' input and challenge if we can get close to agreement or maybe with some slight amendments. So I'll share with you what I'm proposing, and then we can go from there if that's all right, members. So saying that the committee notes and welcomes the overall budget from officers and recognises their ongoing work in delivering a balanced budget following the continued inflationary and demand-led financial pressures from the COVID-19 pandemic. In regard to the areas within the Corporate Finance and Property Select Committee's remit, savings will be achieved through streamlining of transactional financial processes and automation of business processes. Not only will these deliver savings, but also deliver technological enhancements that will improve efficiencies in services. The committee also notes the significant capital investment planned to deliver facilities across the north and south of the borough for our residents, as well as major steps to reduce the council's carbon footprint. So I'll start by asking, are people happy to agree those? I'll then see, does anyone have any comments on those that wish to make suggestions? Or
I think we ought to really make the point that we aren't being provided with as much information as previously. I find, bearing in mind that we talk about transparency and accountability, I think it's worrying that there is less information being provided both in the monthly budget reports to Cabinet and also in these reports for the future budgets. And I think we really ought to mention something on that score. Okay, we've asked a lot of questions, but personally, I don't think we should have had to have asked those questions, and in previous years, we wouldn't have needed to.
So, would we look to put in an opening sentence that said something along the lines of noting and challenging that there is less content than previous years? How is that something along those lines? Would you comfortable with?
Something along. How to loosely in what way? But yeah.
Okay, so for the, I think given the timings, are we, Liz, are we happy for, through yourself outside of the meeting, between myself and the Labour lead, to agree an opening sentence to reflect the changing nature or the changed nature of how the report and the content of the report that is presented?
Yes, that's fine, Chairman.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, I know that's something that you've raised at full council before and had an answer to, but I think I'd be happy for us to note that. That's a fair comment. There is a difference. Obviously, we've asked more questions than you maybe would have done before if that information had been there, and Ian, I think, has satisfactorily answered those. The rest of the committee, everyone happy with that approach? Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Brings us to agenda item 7. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Council website performance and improvement. Members will remember this was deferred from a previous meeting. I think members had a keen interest in the development work that took place on the council's website, the changes, upgrades, I'm going to say, as well, to parts of it. I think members will have questions around some of the functionality and the resident interaction, but Sarah, thank you for the report. Gratefully, if you can just talk us through a little bit, and then I expect members will have questions following that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me this evening. Obviously, you've gone through the report, so I don't plan to go through that in detail. I probably wanted just to highlight a few things that perhaps are harder to get across on the page. I think, obviously, the website is a really key part of our digital strategy because it's the shop front, if you like, to residents to enable them to engage with us digitally. And whilst on one hand that might seem simple, there's quite a lot of work going on behind the scenes to create the functionality so that when a resident contacts us, we can actually do something meaningful with that contact. But equally so, recognising the website has two key purposes, really. One is about information and advice, and the other is handling simple transactions and enabling a resident to kind of request something or engage with us around a structured process. So to date, quite a lot of energy and effort has gone into changing the platform into the new GOS platform that was detailed in the paper, and also migrating information across into that new framework. And in doing so, what we've tried to do is refresh and modernise the content, as well as starting to make better use of the functionality. So historically, local authorities are very good at using websites to kind of put a lot of statutory information, but that's not really why residents go to the website. They go to the website because they want to know when their bin's going to be collected, or how to access something, or because they want information about what can be recycled, those sorts of things. So in terms of that transition, we've tried to change a lot of the content and language to make it a lot more straightforward, aligned to what we know people ask us. So picking up on the points that we've just discussed from the presentation around finance, the website is the first part of enabling some of that streamlining, because if we capture information correctly, either a resident then can meet their needs from those pages and that information and don't need to contact us, which is a positive because they need to be met at exactly the time that they wanted it. Or if they do need to contact us about a transaction, they can give us exactly the right information up front, so we don't need to go backwards and forwards to them, and we can take that information and fulfil their request. The ultimate is where the information that's captured on the website goes all the way through to the relevant back office team, and they then just pick up that request in their workflow and process it. that sounds very simple, but it actually requires a number of different systems to link up. So that's why what you see sometimes at the front isn't necessarily kind of all the things that are going on at the back, whilst we work through that in a structured way. The key thing is that we're trying to do is obviously enable people to have their needs met 24/7, so that they can actually access information at a time that suits them, not when we choose to have our telephone lines open. And we also starting to take a much more data-led approach to decision making. So again, linking into the information that we discussed with Naveed earlier. So greater analysis of the type of contacts that residents contact us, the contact centre for. So what is it people are phoning around? What's their questions? What's their queries? How do they ask the question? And then what we can do is go back to the website to rephrase the information so that actually it should try to prevent people from needing to ring. And again, that's seen as a positive thing because a person can just look something up at a time that suits them rather than having to find a telephone number, wait in a queue and then contact us. So a good example of that was mentioned in the report around repairs. So lots of housing tenants contact us about repairs, but actually a large portion of those calls, they don't result in a repair being booked because it's for something that a tenant is actually responsible for themselves. So our view was that the information on the website about what a tenant's responsible for versus what we're responsible for wasn't clear enough. So quite a lot of work has been done to tailor that information in a more friendly way, whereas historically we had some quite clunky PDFs that you had to kind of wade through to find the information. So quite logical, pragmatic work, but does also take time because you have to get feedback from residents and make sure that that work is shaped. Just kind of skimming through to make sure I don't miss anything. So the My Account was also part of the first wave of changes, which was, we did have My Account before, but it was on a different system. So we had to create that functionality in the GOS platform and link it to Hillingdon First cards as well, so that residents' account was also linked to their My Account. And as part of that, we also addressed the issue where previously residents had to log into their account to raise a request online, but we knew that that was preventing some people from using the online service. So now for nearly all appropriate services, the resident doesn't need to log into their account if they don't want to. They can simply raise a request. The benefit of using their account means that they could track what had happened to their query. So that's a personal choice for the resident if they do want to track that or not. But I know that that was something that was a challenge previously. The main thing that we're really now trying to do is make it easier for residents to navigate the website, and we've done some development work that's yet to go live. It's just in the final stages of development of using chatbots, so that actually a resident can type their query in and the chatbot will find the information on the website. So something like if people want to know where do I recycle batteries, as a good example, that is a very common query. They could type in recycle and batteries and then it will bring the information straight to them so they don't need to look for it on the website themselves, reducing the number of clicks that they would have to go through. And where relevant, it would also be able to text them a link to a form or a piece of information if it was something that they wanted to follow up on. So we're trying to find ways of enabling the information on the website to be more interactive and more tailored to an individual's use. Also taking that learning from other websites. Obviously the local authority has a set range of services it offers, but all of our residents are used to engaging with other organisations and using their website functionality. So there's sort of an expectation that our website is also able to meet those same sorts of standards. We've done quite a lot of work recently looking at the customer pathway through our housing service, and there's a number of initiatives that we're going to be working on to improve that. And really understanding as well some of the reasons why we have so many contacts around people paying their rent. Lots of people, when they make a large payment to them, they're quite uncertain about it, and so often something that we might think is quite simple, you know, they just make their payments and that would be done, often generates quite a lot of queries. So again, looking at ways of which we can present the information back to a tenant so that they're assured that their payment has been received and they feel confident about the transaction that they've gone through. Again, to reduce the anxiety, but also stopping them from needing to contact us. Because if they are anxious about something, having to wait for the phone to be answered isn't necessarily going to help their anxiety, but seeing it happen quickly will. So I think it's really important to say that it's the foundation item of our digital pathways. The work is now carrying on in earnest to link that information through into the back office so that it's streamlined, and that will enable a number of the efficiencies we've seen. And I'll give you an example. So if someone fills out some information on the website and all that happens to that is that goes into an email and then lands in somebody's email box, actually that's quite a lot of work then to open that email, pull the information up, copy that information into the relevant system so that they can process it. Which isn't very efficient and not really what we'd expect to happen. But we're developing the system so the information that the residents types in goes straight into the right database, and then the worker only needs to open their cases for that day and all the information's there. And those are the key stages that start to release some of the savings that we've spoken around in business administration, but also enables us to make roles much more rewarding, because, opening emails, copying and pasting information from one system to another isn't very rewarding and doesn't add as much value, whereas what we want to do is enable people to spend the time focusing on the query and actually responding to the problem or the issue that has been raised. I just really wanted to give you a flavour of how this comes a little bit more to life. I hope that's helpful, but I'm happy to take any sort of detailed questions on the report as a whole.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis first.
I just wondered whether we run surveys after people have been on the site. Obviously we track them. You track them so you can see how long they're on the site, and you see which pages they're going onto and which they exit from. But it's also quite useful to know whether they actually found satisfaction and were able to solve their problems.
Particularly with the housing work we've just completed, we've had user groups actually testing and helping us to create the pathways. So as well as evaluating what people have experienced afterwards, there is an option on most web pages for residents to give feedback, and we do get quite a lot of feedback, both positive, just saying that they've enjoyed something, as well as some suggestions for improvement, and utilising residents as we design something is going to be a much bigger feature of things as we go forward, because the best will in the world is how we see things as officers. When you're immersed in a service isn't quite how residents see things when they're trying to get something done. So that's a really key part of what we're doing.
Councillor Bliss.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear you talk about tenants making payments and not being sure if it's gone through okay or not. It leads on to what I was going to ask. A few years ago, we used to have a facility where we could actually log into our rent and service charge accounts so we could see what had been paid and what was still owing. Are there any plans to bring that back?
Yes. So as part of tailoring the My Account pages, what we want to be able to do is if a resident is a tenant, then we would want them to be able to access their tenancy information and see that. I think now already, it's not an area I've been particularly involved in, but I'm sure that when you go to make a payment, you can check to see what your outstanding balance is. So you can see that now as part of that process if you want to check your balance before you make a payment.
Thank you, but it used to be more detailed. You could sort of have a history of payments and what was still outstanding, and it would be nice to be able to get back to that again.
I need to double check what the functionality is for that, and I'll just feed that back to Elizabeth for the notes.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question on the My Hillingdon account. I got the sense from residents that some found it a challenge to change to the new system. So I know it states in the report that they were redirected to create a new account, and we now have close to 40,000 registered with a new My Hillingdon account. That figure of 40,000, do we know how many had an old My Hillingdon account, effectively a login? I guess through the transition where people had to register for a new account, did we lose some? Did people just give up and not create a new one. Because I sensed during that transition, whilst we did a lot to publicise it, people couldn't quite understand that they had an account and then they didn't have an account.
I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head in terms of those that tried and failed. I know that the team did do some work to marry off the new account details versus those that were registered for a previous account. So I should be able to see, in terms of high-level numbers, what percentage of people that had an account previously have recreated one. It is worth noting that we would have had a lot of inactive accounts. So I think what they took a view of a period of time that an account has been active, so where someone has completed a transaction on their old account, and just use that as the proportion, because obviously lots of people would have created an account, moved, and those sorts of things. But we definitely did that analysis, so I will get that checked for you.
Thank you. Councillor Richard.
Thank you. I have to say that the new website is significant improvement generally, and certainly on mobile devices it's usable rather than unusable as the old one was, really. But there does seem to be quite a lot of information which has not been brought forward. Some of it's been archived, I think. There are still some missing links, and sometimes you go into the old system. For example, I was looking at some green spaces, and I couldn't find the link for Ruislip Woods. Was unavailable. I somehow found the management plan, but that was, I think, more by luck than by the system. But as I say, it's quite good. But there's quite a lot of information which is missing. Certainly on young people, the information on the young people's centres seems to be out of date. But that's probably not your fault. It's just the way things have happened over the last couple of years. But yeah, and I'm not sure that the information is really helpful to young people. I don't know how that can be improved.
In terms of areas like missing links, obviously that's a continued piece of work to make sure that links are maintained. So I know that that's a kind of a constant action, if you like, so that is in hand. I'll get particularly the ones that you've mentioned revisited. In terms of young people particularly, so some information might not have migrated across, and that might have been a conscious decision. So it's difficult without looking at specifics to know whether or not that was a conscious decision not to bring that forward. And in some areas, again, where perhaps it was felt that the information was there but not as tailored as it should have been to the audience, and was maybe perhaps somewhat old-fashioned and dated, it would have been deemed better not to have moved that across and then to start building up fresh information based on questions and queries. What you tend to find with a website is over time it kind of gets a bit cluttered, sort of a bit like an old diary. You put lots of things in it and then it becomes less useful. So starting afresh is better to then build up based on demand. And I haven't had any specific feedback about information missing for young people. I will look at the young people centres particularly. I think, again, that's an area where with less delivery because of the pandemic, less face-to-face, there would be less information to share around programmes and activities, which might have affected the amount of information that's available. But I would expect that to be refreshed and reinvigorated as those services come back into normal delivery.
Sarah, I'd say that we as councillors are probably quite high users of the website. Again, just from personal experience, if a resident contacts me for something, if I don't know it, I'd look on our website, try and find it to signpost them. So linking that to the point that Councillor Richard made, that he's identified bits where there's a broken link or something doesn't exist, is there a way that we as councillors can feed into somewhere, as in not suggesting everyone emails you, because that is probably not the best efficient use of the process, but is there an approach we can take? And again, I'm not sure if members' inquiries is the right route, but is there a way that we can help to find, if we identify something that is glaring obvious, and again, if it's, I'm not suggesting that people try and rewrite content for the site, but if there's a broken link or something like that, what's the best route for us to help resolve that?
On every page there should be a link to provide feedback. So just simply click on that link and type in the information, and then that will come through to the web team. So if you notice a missing link, then you can, I'll speak to Elizabeth and make sure I just kind of perhaps show an example with the minutes of this meeting to show what that would look like. Just click on that detail. You don't have to type out very much. Just say, you know, link broken or whatever it might be, and then that would be picked up and addressed immediately.
Councillor Edgington.
I did look at that, but I don't think it actually helped me. I don't think I was able to give feedback on the missing link because I was somewhere else by that time. So the other area which seemed to be wrong or missing was to do with the Chamber of Commerce. Anything to do with business is really, really limited now on our website. Business support is very limited, and nothing to do with the Chamber of Commerce here, for example. So the link to that's gone, and I think to any other organisation which might support businesses.
That's really helpful feedback, especially in light of businesses recovering on the back of the pandemic. So I'll pick that up and take that forward. Thank you.
Okay. Garand again in on any more? No, lovely, Sarah. Thank you very much for taking the time and for really covering this, because I know you're sort of stepping in on this item on behalf of someone else. So thank you for your time this evening. Thank you. So that takes us to agenda item 8, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan. Item B in A3. Anyone have any comments on this? Councillor Bliss.
Would it be possible to see something about the lift refurbishment and upgrade at Fairley House and the Gouldings Uxbridge? Just that I've got in the back of my mind that they were not done too long ago, and it would be nice to see why they're being refurbished again.
This is line 100, reference 110.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, it's a new item. I think, Liz, can we speak to lead officer Gary Pentecost, I think, named on that? Can we see if we can get additional information for them around that, please? Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
Chairman,
you.
we can request that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Other than that, happy to note the forward plan. Thank you. Agenda item 9 is the work programme. Next meeting comes around quickly, February the 2nd, so 3 weeks today. At that, we will have comments from all select committees on the budget, as well as an item on energy efficiencies within the civic centre. So I think that's something that we've looked at previously, but obviously given the change in focus on reduction in carbon footprint and being more energy efficient, that will be an interesting one for us to hear about for this main building. Councillor Edgington.
Just wanted clarification. Where it says all select committee, so we're receiving the other select committees' budget responses and the kind of...
Yeah, that's right. So
I remember in the past we did it, but it wasn't clear that this time it was going to, as we're all select committees rather than...
We can check, but I'm confident that it follows the same pattern that whatever the corporate services committee was the lead committee that got all of them came into that and then noted them alongside our own, which then goes into the budget as the combined select committee comments. Corporate services and partnerships.
Yes,
Policy
Chairman.
overview committee, that was it. Yeah.
I can confirm that is correct,
Right.
Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, otherwise that will bring the meeting to a close. I'll probably see everyone tomorrow night. Thank you.